Thank you, First Minister. There's confusion from some cancer patients who thought their operations would not be cancelled when the other elective procedures were. However, we've now seen a letter from a patient in Fife who was due to be operated on for prostate cancer this month, and that's now not happening. He was diagnosed in July last year and is obviously concerned that his cancer may spread and become worse. Do you have any updated guidance for other patients like him who are waiting to have an operation to remove their cancer?
Well, we've been very clear that urgent treatment should go ahead in the NHS. I'm not obviously going to comment on a specific case when I've not got all of the details of that. We would, of course, be willing to have a closer look at that if we had the details. But I hand over to the Health Secretary who will say a bit more about how we're managing capacity in the NHS to make sure we are able to deal with the virus, but also ensure that urgent treatment takes place as people would expect.
Some cancer patients, the clinical judgment, the individual clinical judgment may be that the risk of the operation in circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic is too great against the risk of postponing the operation for some time. So whilst we certainly can't comment on individual cases, it is always a clinical decision as to whether or not an operation in any circumstance goes ahead or not. And I would hope that when those clinical decisions are being taken, there is the fullest possible discussion with the patient involved so that they understand what their situation is, the reason for that, and what they should expect to happen in the days and weeks ahead.
Thank you, First Minister. I just wanted to ask what consideration you gave about appointing a new Chief Medical Officer with a more virus-based background and expertise.
Well, at the moment, for me, we will obviously have a recruitment exercise in due course to replace Catherine Calderwood. At the moment, the importance for me is as much continuity of advice as possible. Gregor, as Deputy Chief Medical Officer, has been integrally involved in the development of our response so far. But of course, we continue to take a wide range of advice from different scientific expertise, and it's important that that continues. But the consideration, of course, to a longer-term replacement will happen as soon as we get to a point in the development of this virus that we think we've got the ability to consider that properly. Kieran Andrews from The Times.
On the death of the care at home worker today, was that person, do we know if that person had been provided with the correct PPE equipment and what is being done to get visors, goggles in particular, which we know schools are making to order? What's been done to get that to the front line? And then just briefly on the CMO yesterday, have you checked with your other advisors and ministers, and are you confident that no one else has taken or will be taking trips to second homes in the future?
I absolutely expect all of my ministers, all of my advisors to follow the advice and the guidance that is there. We are asking the public to follow that. There is not one rule for us and one rule for other people. It is vital that we all do the right thing. I'm going to hand over to the Health Secretary on the issue of distribution of PPE to carers and the front line. On your specific question about the home care worker, that is obviously one of the things that we will be seeking to establish, but obviously I'm not going to go into any more detail about the specific circumstances of that right at this moment.
We have now introduced a direct distribution, ordering and distribution line for all social care provision, both care at home, care homes, carers, personal assistants to individuals who will be able, with that clinical guidance, to directly order what is needed, and the distribution line to them is direct now, as it is to primary care and separately to hospital care. And we have, as we've said before, that direct email address for people to raise individual concerns. It is monitored continuously, and it has ministerial oversight in order to ensure that we can respond quickly where people are raising concerns about the supply of PPE to them as an individual or to their area of work.
I just wanted to ask, on Dr Calderwood, will she receive any sort of payoff after departing her position? And also, what are you going to do to revamp the public health information campaigns on TV and online to rebuild public trust following her departure?
I'm not going to comment on terms and conditions of somebody who has resigned. If it is appropriate, then the Permanent Secretary will issue information about that. We had already yesterday taken steps to begin to replace the adverts with Dr Calderwood with others, and that work is ongoing. And that work will take the opportunity to reiterate the vital importance of the advice that we are giving people. It's really tough, it's really hard, I don't underestimate that, but staying at home, apart from essential purposes, is vital for your own sake, for your family and community, and that's why we're asking you to do it.
You expected all your team, government, politicians and officials to abide by the guidelines, but are you aware of any that have flouted, any others that have flouted the guidelines?
No, I'm not. And want to be very clear about that. But let me take the opportunity again to make clear to everybody, regardless of who they are, regardless in what walk of life they are in, that it is important that everybody abides by and complies with this advice.
Do you have any concerns that your decision-making on this might have led to the public losing trust in your own judgment on some of these lockdown measures and your response to it?
Well, I certainly hope not. I will continue to do what I have been doing, is be candid and open with the public about why I'm asking you to do the things I'm asking you to do. I will continue to share the information I have and be frank when there are questions to which I don't yet have answers. And I'll be candid as well about the difficulty of the judgments and the decisions that all of us are being asked to make at this time, all of us in leadership positions and in positions of government. None of it is easy, none of it is straightforward, but that's my job and responsibility, and I will continue to make these judgments in good faith to the best of my ability, and always putting at the forefront what is best to equip me and the government and the country to get through this challenge as well as we possibly can. This is not a normal political situation. If it had been, then perhaps the kind of things that a politician usually thinks about in these circumstances of news management and spin would have been to the forefront. Those weren't issues at the forefront of my mind yesterday. What was at the forefront of my mind was how, firstly, I continued to make sure that I had the best advice to enable me to deal with this virus, and also how I ensured that the confidence of the public in the advice that we are giving them was maintained. And those were things I was weighing up throughout the day. And as you know, I came to a view last night that the Chief Medical Officer had to resign in order to make sure that we maintained that confidence. So I'll be open and candid with the public about the reasons I take decisions, and I'll always seek to do that with the absolute interest of giving us the best chance of fighting this virus at heart.
How much did the Scottish Government spend on its public information campaign featuring Dr Calderwood, which has now been withdrawn, and who do you plan to front the new revised campaign?
I don't have the cost information to hand. The campaign has been running for a number of weeks now, and it's been important and valuable that it has been running in order to get that message across. Obviously, when we have new adverts to go, then we will be making clear to the public the content of them, and that is something that will become apparent in the very near future. The cost information I don't have to hand, but of course we can provide that later on.
Good afternoon, First Minister. You said today there was 199 patients in ICU. Can you tell us today how many of those patients are health workers? And can you also give us figures for the amount of hospital-acquired coronavirus?
Again, these are questions I can't give you the answers to right now, but on a range of these things, this is the information we are seeking to be able to make available. As I've said previously, when we've been dealing with relatively small numbers, patient confidentiality has been a much bigger consideration. As numbers unfortunately rise, that becomes less of a consideration. So we are seeking to make as much information available as possible, both about the nature of the spread of the virus, where it is spreading, where people are picking it up, and also as much information as possible about those who are in hospital or in intensive care. And later this week, we'll be able to set out some of the information that Health Protection Scotland will be able to make available. Gregor, do you want to add anything?
I think just simply to say that we're very conscious that both from the reports in the international literature and also from the experience which we are learning from colleagues further south, is that we're very, very aware that the possibility of hospital spread is very real with this virus. This virus appears to love institutions, and so it's something that myself, the National Clinical Director and the Chief Nursing Officer are keeping a very close eye on, and we're putting into place arrangements so that we can try to monitor that on a Scotland-wide basis.
Could you tell us about the criteria that the government is using to measure the effectiveness of the current social distancing policies? And so far, are the policies being more effective or less effective than your initial models suggested?
I'm going to hand over to Gregor in a minute, who's obviously been very closely involved in the modelling that we are doing. And I think as we spoke about last week, we are in a transition from computer modelling to modelling that is using much more real-time and real-life data, which will make those models more accurate and allow us to predict with greater certainty the compliance levels with social distancing and the lockdown measures more generally, and how the virus is spreading. We're using a range of tools to try to measure compliance with social distancing, from attitude surveys through to different sources of information that are available in Scotland, and our modellers and statisticians are using that to enrich the data that they are using. What we have said repeatedly, and it's still, given where we are right now, it's still important to say this, is that it is too early for us to be certain what impact the measures are having, and that is to do with the length of time that different stages of this virus take to develop. So at the time these measures were introduced, some of the people that are now manifesting through hospital admissions, ICU admissions and unfortunately deaths will have already been infected before these measures were introduced. So it takes 2 to 3 weeks at least for us to be able to assess the impact and the effectiveness of them, and that's why the review date around Easter was decided on when we announced the lockdown measures a couple of weeks ago. So these are things that our modellers and statisticians and scientists are looking at very carefully as we speak, and I hope in the days and weeks to come that will give us much greater certainty about the spread of the virus, when we expect it to peak, and when we might then be able to plan our way out of the measures that are in place right now. As we've covered a briefing before, we have established in Scotland a scientific advisory group, which is chaired by Professor Andrew Morris, which is drawing on the information coming from SAGE, the UK-wide advisory group, and making sure we understand that in a Scottish context. And I would hope that in the days to come we can, at a briefing like this, go into much more detail about, at that stage, what that modelling and interrogation of data is starting to show us, because that will give us a lot more certainty in answering some of the understandable questions about how much longer all of this is going to last.
You're explaining in terms of the original statement that went out, I think, on the Saturday night into Sunday morning, and that reflected what you said, the information the government had on the House, and then the CMO later clarified that there'd been, in fact, 2 visits. So can I just check, before that original statement was issued, the government had actually spoken to the CMO, and had she withheld or not told the government about the other visits, or how did it actually work?
The query, as I understand it, was specifically about a visit this weekend. The statement that went out was a reflection of our understanding at that time of the reasons for our visit that weekend. That reflected the understanding we had. She later made clear that there had been a second visit, and of course made that clear at the briefing yesterday. So, that's the situation there. What I made clear yesterday, what she made clear yesterday, was that the reasons, in a sense, are irrelevant, because there was no justification for her having been at the House on 1 or on 2 occasions, because it was in breach of the guidance and the advice that was issued. And that is the reason why she nor I sought to justify or defend that action in any way.
There are reports today that many businesses across the UK will not survive lockdown if it continues beyond June. Can I ask if the Scottish Government is already planning to offer increased support, in addition to measures it has already announced, to support firms in the long term?
That's an important question, Chris. These matters of how we support the economy in this really difficult time remain under ongoing review. I think I've mentioned at this podium before that I chair a weekly subcommittee of the Cabinet, specifically looking at the economic impact and how we support the economy. There have been some very significant interventions made by the UK government that has resulted in consequential funding for the Scottish Government, which we have passed on to businesses in full. But I understand absolutely the extremely challenging position that businesses are in because of this. So we will continue to review, discuss with the UK Government and consider on an ongoing basis further support that business will require. None of us want to be in these lockdown measures for a moment longer than is necessary. First and foremost, because the impact on individuals, on mental health, potentially on other health conditions is not one we want to have, but also because the impact on the economy is absolutely significant and will become more and more significant. But it is equally important that we don't prematurely come out of these lockdown measures in a way that simply allows the virus to spiral again, because that would have a very negative impact on public health, but it would also have a negative impact on the economy. So getting the balance of this right going forward will not be easy for any of the governments across the UK, but considering all of these matters is vital in making sure we come to the right decisions about when and in what order we eventually come out of these lockdown measures. But support for business remains something that we will keep under review on an ongoing basis.
Hello, First Minister. Just asking you again about your discussion yesterday evening with Dr. Calderwood. Exactly what was it? What new information came to you which led you to then believe or decide that her position was untenable? Brian Taylor has suggested that a lot of SNP MSPs were being told by their constituents how angry and upset they were about Dr. Calderwood breaching the lockdown. Were those conversations part of the reason why you decided her position was untenable?
No, I didn't have conversations last night with MSP colleagues, and it wasn't so much new information. It was my reflection on the course of the day. Certainly people had been contacting me through email and other means, and it became clear to me that Dr. Calderwood remaining in office, and the reason I had wanted her, if possible, to remain in office was about that continuity of advice, but that was going to be a risk to the confidence in and trust in the government's message, and that was not a risk or to be fair to her, she was prepared to take. So, that is the reason for that change, in my view, last night, and it was based on an honest assessment of the balance. As I said, I think, to a question earlier on, yesterday I was balancing two factors, both of which were important to me as First Minister in the management of this virus. Firstly, continuity of advice from a Chief Medical Officer who has been immersed in and integral to Scotland's response, and if at all possible, not losing that in the middle of the handling of a virus. But on the other hand, understanding acutely the importance of public confidence in the messaging. And these were the things, and I'm just being as open as I can here about my thought processes, these were the things I was balancing yesterday. And at an earlier point of the day, I perhaps thought that, when she apologised and made clear that her actions were unacceptable, then the importance of her continued advice would be the priority. But it became clear to me as the day developed that that would be a risk to the public message. And so, these judgments are, they're my responsibility to make as First Minister, and I stand by them. But they're rarely, in these kind of situations, absolutely black and white. All of us in these positions have to balance a number of things, and I try to do that in good faith, to the best of my ability, but absolutely focused on what I need to do to equip us to get through this situation as well as we possibly can.
You said, you have been very open at the start of this crisis, you said you might make mistakes. Do you think by standing by the CMO for much of yesterday that you have made a mistake? And can I also ask just about the care home situation? Are you aware of multiple deaths in other care homes? And should people who are worried about elderly loved ones in care homes, should they be thinking about taking them out and caring from the home if at all possible?
Look, in relation to your first question, other people can judge whether they think I got it right or wrong. I'm perfectly able to deal with that. What I'm seeking to do, candidly, is set out the basis of my decision making. These are, as I said to Sev, they are rarely straightforward black and white decisions. Actually, in in a different context, in a purely political context, perhaps the decision might have been more straightforward, because the traditional, how do you spin and news manage and politically deal with something might have been more to the fore. Yesterday, I was trying to work out what was the best thing to do in difficult circumstances for the government's handling of the virus. And I've just set out the two things I was seeking to balance, and why my view on the balance between those two things changed as the day went on. And, I can only be open with people about that process of thinking and decision making. And of course, people not in my shoes will say if they were in my shoes, they would have made a different decision, and that is perfectly legitimate. But I am the one in my shoes, and I'm the one that has to make these decisions, and I will do so for the best motivations, in good faith, and for the best of reasons, and that's what I sought to do yesterday. In terms of care homes, there will have been further, unfortunately, deaths of people in care homes. Obviously, we will be open about situations like the Burlington care home. No, I wouldn't advise people to take their loved ones out of a care home. We have guidance that has been provided to care homes about the management of this situation, and the Care Inspectorate is working closely with care homes to support them as they manage this incredibly difficult situation.
You said you would leave it to other people to judge whether you had made a mistake. I mean, doesn't that just add to this fiasco, really? I mean, it was fairly obvious from the instant that story appeared that Catherine Calderwood was damaged beyond repair, and you seem to be the only person in the country who could not appreciate that at first glance. It wasn't a delicate matter to balance. It was a stone-cold clangor on your part not to have got rid of her right at the start. Now, would you apologise for that mistake?
I am very sorry that this situation has arisen. I deeply regret, I've said that in interviews already this morning, I deeply regret that this situation arose. I beg to differ with you, Tom, as the one who's in these positions, particularly now, in a unique and unprecedented set of circumstances. There are different judgments to be brought to bear. We are in the middle of a pandemic. We are in a fast-moving, fast-developing situation. In a different context, in slower time, it wouldn't have been perhaps the same consideration to lose a chief medical officer. But that was nothing yesterday in the context that I'm dealing with just now. And I would simply say that I don't think it was simply, as you put it, I had things to balance yesterday reflective of the circumstances that we are in. I did that. The balance of judgment changed as the day went on, and I've set out pretty fully my own thought processes and decision making, and I stand by that. But I absolutely, I didn't want this situation to arise. I regret it, and I'm deeply sorry for it. That is all the questions. Can I thank all of the journalists for joining, and can I thank those watching at home? As I said earlier on, this has not been an easy 24 hours for the government. I hope I have managed to give those watching at home an insight into the issues that I was balancing in decision making yesterday. But regardless of that, this is an incredibly difficult situation for the country, and we are giving advice, and it is important we continue to give that advice for the reasons that we are doing so, by staying at home, by following the public health advice. Each and every person is helping us slow the spread of this virus and protect the NHS and save lives. I'm deeply grateful to everybody who's doing that, and I look forward to sharing more information and more up-to-date information on the situation when we join you again tomorrow. Thank you very much indeed.